suggestion. So you made a suggestion to him. Yes, I made a suggestion to him, etc. And you slowly move something away, changing your question, changing the way the question is phrased until such time as your question is, so what happened? And your student can say, I suggested setting up a new cost structure without aid. Okay, and that's the third strategy, repetition. Can't get anywhere without drill, without repeating, without making the cognitive depth function in this case. You've got to increase the cognitive depth, and you can't do it by slapping it up on the board and saying what you need to say. You have to get them to say it and say it and say it until it's. So we use three strategies: retrieve, recast, repeat. The fourth strategy is research. This is where they look at the structure and they see the structure not unique. That under a number of circumstances, that structure stays the same. And that is the circumstance of using the word suggest. So working on the paradigmatic axis, you say, I suggested having a video conference. I suggested doing a simulcast. I suggested having a meeting, so that the student sees that after the word suggest, there's a gerund. You can also work on the syntagmatic axis where you change the grammar structure. I suggested that he set up a new cost structure, depending on whether you want to go into the subject. Or make a passive. I suggested that a new cost structure be set up. Shows the student the structure that would follow suggest if you wanted to use those two, a passive or the subjunctive, right? So that's the research element. After the hard teaching part of the lesson, which includes those four strategies, I move into the record strategy of Dogme, which is I then ask each student if they will come up with a sentence that for them is personal using the structure. So whoever is in the class will think about a suggestion they made and hopefully create a sentence using the correct grammar in order to personalize the structure. I then record that as an MP3 file. They practice it at the center where I work, in the laboratory, until they feel comfortable with it. Or if they're going home and coming back for a lesson next week or the next day, it goes on their MP3 players and they practice it until they feel comfortable. And I can use it possibly in their stories for the next day, or use it without too much effort when it comes up again. I need a drink of water, that's okay. All right, so what have we done? We've retrieved, repeated, researched, and recorded. For me, is probably the most critical is to recite. When the students come back to the class the next day, bring in the structure. Get them to use the structure. Get them to recall what it is they did the day before in terms of the structure, so that eventually there is acquisition and assimilation of the structure. Right. Those are the first two tenets of Dogme, and now we're going to move on to the third, which is probably the most controversial, and that is the materials light aspect. And I'm afraid at this point I'm going to tell you about the grocery shopping. I say I'm afraid because it was probably one of the most embarrassing Thornbury lessons I have ever learned in the business English class. And it's probably also the lesson that converted me. As I said, when I first started teaching there, I knew very little about business. And when I had actually a German student, he told me that he needed to speak about figures. And I know nothing about graphs and trends and figures and stuff. So I went rushing off to my little collection of EFL materials and I thought, oh, inspire me, inspire me. And I came to a rather worthy journal that suggested that because most business people and numbers and things, a good lesson idea was to take them grocery shopping. Ah, brilliant. Went raking through my handbag, came across a lovely long tilt slip from Sainsbury's, went into Sainsbury's, got a lovely discount flyer on all the weekly specials, lovely pamphlets from from manufacturers, rushed into class on a high, going to teach the best lesson of my life with all this marvelous realia. Well, after about 10 minutes, my German student looked at me quizzically and he said, I wish you could do a German accent. He said, last time I went shopping, I went with my wife. I said, yeah. Yeah, and? He said, and she did the shopping and I had a coffee. Am I not surprised? And then he said, but we only spoke German. Well, I tell you, the blood rushed to my cheeks as fast as the scales fell from my eyes, and I thought, what on earth are you doing? What does this man need shopping in English for? Teach him what he needs. His work, his environment, his life. Stop trying to make the man buy coffee from Sainsbury's. So I looked at him, I hope I wasn't was. I looked at him and I said, you wouldn't happen to have a set of figures on you, would you? At which point he opened up his laptop and said, here are the last figures of my sales for the year. So don't go in there armed with piles of irrelevant stuff, forcing students to focus on figures that they've never seen and that mean absolutely nothing to them. Go into your classroom and say, I'm not sure I understand your figures from the last quarter. Could you tell them to me or explain them to me? And as so the language emerges, so he's using language that he needs, you're teaching him stuff that he needs, you're expanding his vocabulary and looking at structures that will for him be useful. So let's do some takeaways. First of all, function in a complete immersion environment. Secondly, use what comes up. If it comes up, it's needed by the student. Thirdly, help the students say what they want to say. Don't make them say what you want them to say. Provide the student with plenty of opportunities to practice both in and outside the classroom. And number 5, if you can remember the 5 strategies from teaching Unplugged, you will be able to carry through a 90-minute lesson without any materials at all. Retrieve the faulty language, recast it, make the student repeat it, research the structure to see the patterns, record it so the student has an opportunity to practice, to get control over that piece of language. And last but not least, don't forget to recycle. I'm not in any way saying this is the only way to teach business English. I wouldn't dare. But what I am saying is that if you do teach it this way, you will be giving your students a completely student-centered, needs-focused lesson, using language that they need and they want. The quicker we get to those needs, the better. And for our students who do not have the luxury of time, much to accomplish, it has to be one of the best ways of getting there. Very much.